The night was alive with the hum of expensive cars and the glow of golden chandeliers spilling onto the red carpet. Inside the grand ballroom of the Graves Empire annual gala, the elite of society sipped champagne, draped in designer labels, exchanging polite but hollow laughter. Outside, Emily Carter, a struggling single mother in a simple thrift store dress, stood frozen near the entrance, gripping an old second-hand clutch. The security guard's glare was sharp. "Miss, are you sure you're at the right event?" he asked, eyeing her worn-out heels with skepticism. Emily swallowed hard. She had been sent here by her catering job to deliver a last-minute request. She wasn't supposed to be here long, just drop off the package and leave. But inside, among the glittering world of the rich, fate had other plans. Just as she turned towards the side entrance, a sleek black Rolls-Royce Phantom pulled up in front of her. The driver barely had time to step out before the rear door swung open. A tall, devastatingly handsome man stepped out, adjusting the cuffs of his tailored suit. Alexander Graves, the ruthless billionaire CEO, known for his icy demeanor and a net worth that could make countries jealous. Emily, lost in thought, took a step back, right into his path. The impact wasn't hard, but it was enough to send Emily stumbling forward. Before she could regain her balance, the unimaginable happened. Her tray of gourmet appetizers slipped from her hands, and an expensive glass of red wine tumbled forward, splashing directly onto Alexander's crisp white shirt. A gasp rippled through the onlookers. Emily's breath caught in her throat. Oh God. She had just ruined the suit of a man who could buy and sell her entire existence with the flick of his wrist. The murmurs began immediately. Who is this girl? Security should escort her out. She just humiliated Alexander Graves. Alexander's cold blue eyes locked onto Emily. For a moment, the entire world seemed to freeze. And then, he spoke, his voice sharp, laced with restrained fury. Do you have any idea what you've just done? Emily's heart pounded, but instead of cowering, she straightened her shoulders. If she were going down, she wouldn't go down silently. Yes, she said, her voice unwavering. I ruined your overpriced shirt. But it was an accident. And last I checked, accidents happen to billionaires too. The murmurs turned into full-fledged shock. No one spoke to Alexander Graves like that. For the first time in years, the billionaire found himself at a loss for words. Emily Carter's life had never been one of comfort. While the elite indulged in champagne and million-dollar galas, she spent her nights balancing two jobs, barely making enough to keep a roof over her and her 6-year-old son, Noah's, heads. Every morning started before dawn, preparing a simple breakfast of toast and whatever she could afford that week, waking up Noah and rushing him to school before clocking in for her first shift at a local diner. The customers were often impatient, her manager barely tolerant, but she endured it all with a forced smile. She had no choice. Her second job at a catering company wasn't any better. The rich people she served barely acknowledged her existence, treating her as nothing more than an accessory to their extravagant events. The pay was meager, but it was better than nothing. At night, exhaustion clung to her like a second skin as she tucked Noah into bed in their cramped apartment, listening to the distant sounds of sirens and arguing neighbors. Still, she whispered promises to her son that one day, things would be different. That one day, he wouldn't have to grow up the way she had, scraping by, feeling invisible. On the other side of the city, Alexander Graves lived a life beyond imagination, yet one filled with its own silent miseries. As the heir to the Graves empire, he had never known financial struggle. From private jets to exclusive clubs, his world was built on power, influence, and ruthless ambition. People feared him and respected him, but no one truly knew him. His days were scheduled to perfection, a never-ending cycle of meetings, acquisitions, and cutthroat business strategies. His nights, however, were empty, despite the luxury surrounding him. The towering penthouse with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city skyline was breathtaking, yet it often felt like a gilded cage. Born into wealth, Alexander had learned from an early age that emotions were weaknesses. His father, the late Richard Graves, had drilled into him that power came not from kindness, but from control. Love, attachment, and vulnerability had no place in a world where fortunes were built on calculated moves and brutal decisions. The only thing that mattered was maintaining dominance, keeping the family legacy untouchable. Relationships were transactional. His engagement to Veronica Sterling, the daughter of a real estate tycoon, was not born out of love, but necessity, a merger of two powerful families. On paper, they were the perfect couple, both wealthy, attractive, and influential. But behind closed doors, their relationship was devoid of warmth. Veronica was cold, calculated, more interested in status than sincerity. Not that it mattered. Alexander wasn't searching for love. He had long accepted that it wasn't meant for men like him. And yet, for the first time in years, a crack had formed in his carefully constructed world, caused by a single moment with a woman who had no place in his life. Emily Carter had stood before him, eyes burning with defiance, completely unafraid of his wealth, his reputation, or the power he wielded. It was maddening. No one spoke to him like that. No one dared. He should have dismissed her from his thoughts the moment she stormed off after ruining his suit. Yet he found himself remembering the way she had refused to cower, the fire in her gaze. But she was nothing more than a fleeting annoyance, he told himself. A minor inconvenience in an otherwise controlled world. Meanwhile, Emily tried to push the embarrassing encounter from her mind. She had far more pressing problems to worry about than an arrogant billionaire's stained shirt. Rent was due, her son's school fees were piling up, and her boss had just cut her hours at the diner, meaning even less money coming in. She needed a miracle, but Emily knew better than to believe in fairy tales. Life had never handed her anything except hardship. The next day, exhausted but determined, she walked into her catering job, ready to put the previous night behind her, only to be blindsided by a devastating blow. Her supervisor handed her an envelope with a grim expression. Inside was a termination letter. "I'm sorry, Emily," her boss said, not unkindly. "Mr. Graves's company is one of our biggest clients. Apparently, he wasn't pleased with last night's incident. He requested that you no longer work at any events affiliated with him." Emily's stomach dropped. Just like that, she had lost one of her only sources of income, all because of a spoiled billionaire who probably didn't even remember her name. Panic surged through her veins. She had bills to pay and a son to feed. She couldn't afford to lose this job. But no amount of pleading changed the outcome. That night, as she sat in their tiny apartment, staring at the shut-off notice for their electricity, she felt an overwhelming sense of defeat. She had tried so hard to build a life for Noah, to shield him from the struggles she'd endured growing up. But reality was cruel. In another part of the city, Alexander sat in his penthouse, nursing a glass of whiskey, unaware that his thoughtless action had just pushed a woman to the edge of desperation. He had already moved on, too focused on his empire to care about the collateral damage of his decisions. But fate, unpredictable and relentless, had no intention of letting their paths diverge just yet. Alexander Graves wasn't a man who dwelled on insignificant events, yet for some inexplicable reason, he couldn't shake the memory of the woman who had ruined his suit. It wasn't the spilled wine that lingered in his mind. It was her defiance, the way she had met his icy glare without flinching. Most people cowered under his gaze, desperate for his approval. But not her. Emily Carter had looked him in the eye, as if he were nothing more than an ordinary man. It was unsettling. He had almost forgotten about her until his assistant, Damien, placed a file on his desk the next morning. "Sir, the catering company you blacklisted sent a formal complaint. One of their employees was terminated because of the incident at the gala. A single mother." Alexander barely glanced up from his laptop. "And why is this my problem?" "Because the employee is Emily Carter," Damien replied, watching his boss's expression carefully. "The woman from last night." That caught Alexander's attention. His fingers paused over the keyboard. "She was fired?" "Yes, sir." She was already struggling, and losing this job has put her in a dire situation. Damien hesitated. Some of our PR advisors believe this could create bad press if the story gets out. A billionaire CEO indirectly causing a single mother to lose her job? Not exactly the best look. Alexander exhaled sharply, annoyed by the unnecessary complication. His entire life revolved around calculated decisions, and this woman, this complete stranger, had somehow become an unplanned variable. Find out where she works now, he ordered, and offer her a position here. Something low-level. Damien raised an eyebrow. You want to hire her? I want to control the narrative, Alexander corrected coldly. Make it clear that this is a favor. She'll be given a job she'll accept, and the issue will disappear. Damien nodded, though he wasn't entirely convinced his boss was as indifferent as he pretended to be. Meanwhile, across town, Emily was having the worst day of her life. With her catering job gone, she had spent the morning begging her diner manager for extra shifts, only to be told there was nothing available. Rent was overdue, the electricity was one late payment away from being shut off, and she had no idea how she would buy groceries for the week. Sitting in her tiny apartment, she rubbed her temples, trying to hold back the frustration. Noah played quietly in the corner with his old toy cars, blissfully unaware of how close they were to losing everything. A sharp knock at the door jolted her from her thoughts. Confused, she opened it to find a sharply dressed man standing there, holding a sleek black folder. Emily Carter? She nodded hesitantly. Who's asking? I work for Mr. Graves. The man introduced himself smoothly. My name is Damien. I'm here with an offer. At the mention of Alexander Graves, Emily stiffened, her jaw tightening. I have nothing to say to that arrogant— It's a job offer, Damien interrupted before she could finish. That caught her off guard. A job? Yes. Mr. Graves is willing to employ you at Graves Enterprises in an administrative position. The pay is more than double what you were making before, and full benefits are included. Emily narrowed her eyes, suspicious. Why would he do that? Consider it a gesture of goodwill, Damien said smoothly. After the, incident at the gala, he felt it was only right to make amends. Emily crossed her arms, staring at him in disbelief. Alexander Graves, a ruthless billionaire, suddenly developing a conscience? She wasn't buying it. Let me guess. He wants me to sign something saying I won't speak out against him? Some kind of PR stunt? Damien didn't deny it. Would it matter? You need a job. He's offering one. Emily hated that he was right. Pride was a luxury she couldn't afford. Still, the idea of working for Alexander made her stomach twist. He was cold, infuriating, and everything she despised about the wealthy elite. But then she thought about Noah, about their overdue bills, about the gnawing fear in her chest every time she checked her dwindling bank account. She had no choice. Lifting her chin, she met Damien's gaze with reluctant resolve. Tell your boss I accept. Excellent, Damien said, handing her the folder. You start Monday. As he walked away, Emily exhaled, gripping the job contract tightly. She had just made a deal with the devil, and she had no idea what she was walking into, staring at him in disbelief. Alexander Graves, a ruthless billionaire, suddenly develops a conscience? She wasn't buying it. Let me guess. He wants me to sign something saying I won't speak out against him? Some kind of PR stunt? Damien didn't deny it. Would it matter? You need a job. He's offering one. Emily hated that he was right. Pride was a luxury she couldn't afford. Still, the idea of working for Alexander made her stomach twist. He was cold, infuriating, and everything she despised about the wealthy elite. But then she thought about Noah, about their overdue bills, about the gnawing fear in her chest every time she checked her dwindling bank account. She had no choice. Lifting her chin, she met Damien's gaze with reluctant resolve. Tell your boss I accept. Excellent, Damien said, handing her the folder. You start Monday. As he walked away, Emily exhaled, gripping the job contract tightly. She had just made a deal with the devil, and she had no idea what she was walking into. Monday morning arrived faster than Emily expected, and with it came an overwhelming mix of dread and determination. Dressed in the only professional outfit she owned, a second-hand blazer and a pair of well-pressed slacks, she stepped into the towering glass skyscraper of Graves Enterprises. The sheer luxury of the place made her feel like she didn't belong. Everything was sleek, modern, and intimidating, from the marble floors to the employees dressed in crisp designer suits. A receptionist directed her to the top floor, where Damien greeted her with his usual polished demeanor. "Welcome to Graves Enterprises," he said, leading her through a series of pristine hallways. "Your position is as an executive assistant in the CEO's department. You'll be handling scheduling, reports, and administrative tasks." Emily frowned. "I thought I was taking a low-level administrative role." "It is," Damien replied smoothly. "For Mr. Graves himself." Her stomach dropped. "Excuse me?" "You'll be working directly under Mr. Graves." The words hit her like a punch. She had assumed she'd be tucked away somewhere, pushing papers and avoiding him altogether. But now she'd be forced to interact with him daily? Before she could protest, Damien stopped in front of a massive set of double doors and knocked once before pushing them open. "Good luck." Emily barely had a second to react before she was ushered inside. The office was exactly what she expected: cold, elegant, and breathtakingly luxurious. Floor-to-ceiling windows displayed the city skyline, and a massive black desk sat at the center. Behind it, Alexander Graves looked up, his piercing blue eyes locking onto her with unreadable intensity. "Miss Carter," he greeted, voice smooth yet detached. "You're late." She glanced at the clock. It was 8:59 a.m. "Seriously?" Clenching her jaw, she forced herself to remain calm. "I was told I start at 9. And yet, punctuality would dictate you arrive earlier." He stood, buttoning his suit jacket with precision. "Shall we begin?" Emily bit back a sarcastic reply and nodded stiffly. Thus began her first day in the lion's den. The work itself wasn't difficult, but Alexander was ruthless. He expected perfection, barely acknowledging her existence unless it was to issue an order or correct a minor mistake with a sharp remark. The man was impossible. Worse, he never seemed affected by anything, never flustered, never uncertain. He was all control and ice-cold authority. But beneath the mask of power, Emily started noticing cracks, small things. The way his fingers tapped against his desk when he was deep in thought. The exhaustion lingered in his gaze when he thought no one was looking. The way his jaw tightened when he received phone calls from his fiancée, Veronica Sterling, whom he always dismissed with clipped responses. Veronica herself was a presence Emily couldn't ignore. A striking blonde socialite with the perfect pedigree. She was everything Alexander's world required, a flawless match on paper. But when she visited the office, the tension between them was palpable, their conversations laced with an underlying hostility. "You never make time for me," Veronica complained during one of her unannounced visits, her voice carrying through the glass walls of his office. "You're always buried in work." "And you're always buried in tabloids," Alexander responded coolly, barely looking up from his laptop. "Let's not pretend this is about anything other than status." Emily wasn't supposed to hear those conversations, but working closely made it impossible not to. And the more she saw, the more she realized that despite his wealth and power, Alexander Graves was just as trapped as she was, only in a different kind of cage. Still, none of that made him any easier to work for. If anything, their power struggle only intensified. Emily refused to be intimidated, meeting his impossible standards with defiance instead of submission. "Redo this report," he ordered one evening, barely glancing at her work. She crossed her arms. "There's nothing wrong with it." He finally looked up, expression unreadable. "Excuse me?" "You didn't even check," she accused. "You just want to make my life miserable." Alexander leaned back, studying her with cool amusement. "If I wanted to make your life miserable, Miss Carter, you'd know." "Oh, I do," she shot back. "Every single day." Something flickered in his gaze. Something almost like intrigue. Before he could respond, his phone buzzed. A private number. He answered. And in an instant, his entire demeanor changed. His shoulders stiffened, his jaw clenched, and for the first time, Emily saw something she had never seen in him before. Fear. Not now, he said sharply. I told you never to call me here. A deep, distorted voice spoke on the other end, too low for Emily to make out the words. But whatever was said made Alexander's grip on the phone tighten. I said I'll handle it, he hissed before hanging up abruptly. He exhaled, rubbing his temples, his carefully constructed mask slipping just enough for Emily to catch a glimpse of something beneath it. Pain. Secrets. And for the first time, she realized that Alexander Graves wasn't just a ruthless billionaire. He was a man haunted by something much darker. Emily had spent weeks working under Alexander Graves, enduring his impossible demands, icy demeanor, and relentless perfectionism. Every day was a battle, a constant push and pull between their clashing personalities. But as much as she hated to admit it, she had started noticing things. Small things. The way he never left the office before midnight. The way his fingers tightened around his pen whenever he was lost in thought. The way exhaustion lingered in his sharp blue eyes, hidden behind layers of control. He was ruthless, yes. But beneath the cold exterior, there was something else. Something fragile. That realization hit her harder than she expected one night when she found herself alone in the office long after everyone else had gone home. She was finishing up reports when she heard a muffled noise coming from Alexander's office. At first, she ignored it, assuming he was on another call. But then she heard it again. A sharp intake of breath, a curse under his breath. Curiosity got the better of her. She pushed open the door without knocking and froze. Alexander was sitting at his desk, but he wasn't the composed, untouchable man she was used to. His usually perfect posture was gone, his shoulders hunched forward. His hand was clenched into a tight fist against his chest, his breathing shallow. A few painkillers lay scattered on the desk beside an unopened bottle of water. His suit jacket was draped over the chair, and for the first time, Emily noticed the deep scars running down his forearm, barely visible beneath the rolled-up sleeves of his dress shirt. "Mr. Graves?" she asked cautiously. His head snapped up, his usual icy mask slamming into place, but there was something different this time. He didn't have the energy to hide it completely. "What are you doing here?" His voice was hoarse, strained. Emily hesitated. "I was finishing up reports." Are you okay?" "I'm fine," he said sharply, but the tension in his body betrayed him. Her gaze flickered to the painkillers on his desk. "That doesn't look fine." Alexander let out a harsh breath, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "It's nothing. Old injury, just drop it." Emily wasn't sure why she didn't. Maybe because for the first time, he didn't seem untouchable. He just seemed human. She walked to his desk, grabbed the unopened bottle of water, and placed it in front of him without a word. His eyes flickered to it, then back to her. Silence stretched between them. He didn't say thank you. Of course he didn't. But for once, he didn't push her away either. From that moment on, things shifted. The next morning, Alexander walked into the office, his usual commanding presence intact. But something had changed. He wasn't as harsh with his corrections. He didn't immediately snap at her when she questioned his decisions. And when she accidentally knocked over a cup of coffee on his desk, an act that would have normally earned her a death glare, he simply sighed and handed her a napkin. "What?" she asked, suspicious. "Nothing," he said, shaking his head. "I just don't have the energy to fight you today." That wasn't true. Something was different. It became more obvious in the following days. The way his gaze lingered on her just a little longer than before. The way his usual sharp replies softened at the edges. The way his fingers twitched slightly when she laughed at something Damien said. Almost like he wanted to join in but didn't know how. And then, one evening, the ice cracked completely. Emily had been struggling to carry a heavy box of files to the storage room when she miscalculated a step and tripped. Before she could brace for impact, strong hands caught her, steadying her before she could fall. Her breath hitched. For a moment, neither of them moved. His hands rested on her waist, firm yet careful, his grip grounding her. She could feel the warmth of his touch even through the fabric of her blouse. She looked up, and for the first time, she saw something in his eyes that she had never seen before. "You should be more careful," he murmured, his voice lower than usual. Emily's heart pounded against her ribs. Yeah, thanks." He released her just as quickly, stepping back as if the moment had never happened. But it had. And they both knew it. The cracks in his ice-cold heart had begun, and there was no going back. The gala was supposed to be a simple work event, nothing more than an evening of networking and formalities. But for Emily, it became a nightmare. She had been hesitant to attend, knowing she didn't belong in a world of designer gowns and high society elites. But Alexander had insisted. "You're my assistant. You need to be there," he had said in his usual commanding tone, leaving no room for argument. So she had swallowed her insecurities, borrowed a dress from her friend, and walked into the grand ballroom with her head held high, determined not to let anyone see how out of place she felt. The venue was stunning, golden chandeliers hanging from the ceiling, a live orchestra playing soft melodies, and a sea of impeccably dressed guests sipping champagne and exchanging polite yet calculated conversations. Emily kept to the sidelines, avoiding attention, but it didn't take long before she became the center of it. It started with whispers, soft, sharp murmurs from women in designer gowns who barely concealed their disdain. "Who is she? Is she seriously wearing that? She looks so desperate to fit in." Emily tried to ignore it, reminding herself that she wasn't here to impress anyone, but then came Veronica Sterling, Alexander's fiancée. The woman made sure Emily was within earshot before turning to her circle of friends and speaking just loud enough for everyone to hear. "Honestly, it's adorable that Alexander has taken in a little charity case," she said with a smirk. "I mean, how else would someone like her get into an event like this?" Laughter followed, cruel, mocking laughter that made Emily's skin burn with humiliation. She wanted to disappear, but before she could move, Veronica took it a step further. "Oh, but I should be nice. After all, isn't it refreshing to see someone here who actually works for a living?" she added with false sweetness. More laughter, more stares. The humiliation crashed over Emily in waves, suffocating and inescapable. She clenched her fists, trying to hold back tears. But then, silence. A hush spread through the crowd, as the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps echoed across the ballroom. Emily turned her head, her breath catching in her throat. Alexander. He moved with the same controlled authority he always had, but there was something different in his eyes. Something dangerous. He stopped beside Emily, his sharp gaze locking onto Veronica with an icy intensity that made the air thick with tension. "I don't recall hiring you as entertainment, Veronica," he said, voice calm, yet laced with something lethal. Veronica's smirk faltered. "Oh, come on, Alex. I was just having a little fun." "At Emily's expense?" His tone dropped a degree colder. "Do you think that amuses me?" Veronica stiffened. No." Alexander cut her off smoothly. "You don't think. That's always been your problem." The crowd sucked in a collective breath. Veronica's face turned red with embarrassment. But Alexander wasn't done. He turned to the room, his voice carrying across the ballroom. "For those of you who don't know, Emily Carter is the most competent employee in my company. She is hardworking, intelligent, and far more valuable than half the people in this room combined." The weight of his words stunned everyone into silence. Emily felt her heart pound wildly in her chest. She had never expected him to defend her, especially not like this. But Alexander wasn't finished. He stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "Don't ever let them make you feel small," he murmured. "You belong here more than any of them." And just like that, he turned and walked away, leaving behind a room full of speechless elites and a stunned Emily, whose humiliation had been replaced with something entirely different: admiration. And maybe, just maybe, something more. Every interaction between Emily and Alexander had changed since that night at the gala. Something unspoken lingered between them now, something neither of them dared to address, but it was there, in the way his gaze softened when he looked at her, in the way her pulse quickened whenever he entered the room. Emily tried to convince herself it was nothing. Alexander Graves was still the same ruthless, untouchable millionaire CEO, and she was still just his assistant. Nothing had changed. Except everything had. It became apparent in the little things. The way he started noticing when she was exhausted and told her to go home early. Something he never did before. The way he made sure she had coffee waiting on her desk every morning, even though he never openly acknowledged it. The way his fingers brushed against hers for just a second longer than necessary when handing her documents. And then there were the moments of silence. The ones that spoke louder than words. Like when she caught him staring at her from his office window as she laughed at something Damien said. His expression unreadable, as if he was fighting a battle he didn't understand. Or when she walked into his office late one night, expecting his usual cold indifference, only to find him leaning against his desk, his tie loosened, his eyes filled with something raw, something vulnerable. He had been different that evening. Less guarded, more human. Do you ever just feel like no matter how much you accomplish, it's never enough? He had asked suddenly, his voice quieter than usual. Emily had hesitated before answering, sensing that this wasn't just a casual remark. Yeah, she admitted. All the time. He had looked at her then, really looked at her, as if realizing for the first time that she understood what it was like to carry burdens too heavy to share, to hide insecurities behind a carefully crafted mask. That moment had changed something between them. The distance that once separated them had started to blur. They weren't just employer and assistant anymore. They were two people who saw each other in ways no one else did. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. And it was undeniable. The unspoken connection between them only grew stronger after that. Every glance, every touch, every stolen moment carried an unspoken question. What are we? But neither of them dared to answer it. Because once they did, there would be no turning back. Emily had convinced herself that Alexander was different now, that the ruthless, cold-hearted man she once feared had changed, that the unspoken connection between them meant something. But all of that shattered in a single moment. It happened on a Friday evening, just as she was leaving the office. The city lights flickered beyond the glass windows, and a storm brewed in the distance, mirroring the unease she had felt all day. Alexander had been distant, more than usual. His calls had been short, his eyes unreadable, his responses clipped. She had tried to shake it off, to convince herself she was overthinking. But something felt off. And then she saw it. A message popped up on his desk while she was gathering documents, a text left open on his phone. The name Veronica Sterling flashed across the screen, but it was the words beneath it that sent an icy chill down Emily's spine. Everything is set for tomorrow. Once the deal is finalized, she'll be out of the picture. Her stomach twisted. Who was she? What deal? 1,000 possibilities raced through her mind, each one worse than the last. Against her better judgment, she quickly scanned through his emails, her hands trembling as she clicked on the most recent thread. And then, she found it. A contract. A buyout agreement. Her name was on it. Emily's heart pounded in her chest as she read the details. Alexander was selling her out. All those nights of working late, all the trust she had started to build. It had all been for nothing. The contract detailed the transfer of her position to a new assistant, a direct payment to ensure her smooth exit, and worst of all, an official statement from Alexander himself, claiming that Emily had been nothing more than a temporary hire who had overstepped her boundaries. Her breath hitched. This wasn't just a business move. This was calculated, cold, ruthless. And the worst part? He hadn't even told her. The door to his office swung open, and Emily barely had time to mask the devastation on her face before Alexander stepped inside. He paused when he saw her standing behind his desk, his sharp blue eyes narrowing. "Emily?" His voice was low, cautious. She turned to him slowly, gripping the papers in her hands. "So, this is what I was to you?" Her voice shook, but she refused to let the tears fall. "A temporary hire? A problem you needed to get rid of?" Alexander's expression remained unreadable, but there was something in his gaze that almost resembled guilt. Almost. "It's not what you think," he said, stepping closer. Emily let out a hollow laugh. "Really? Because it looks pretty clear to me." She held up the contract. "You were planning to fire me, to replace me, and you didn't even have the decency to tell me." His jaw tightened. "This isn't about you. Don't," she snapped, her voice breaking. "Don't stand there and lie to me. Not after everything." Silence. For the first time, Alexander Graves, the untouchable CEO, had no words. Emily felt something inside her shatter. She had trusted him. She had let her guard down, allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't the ruthless man the world claimed he was. But she had been wrong. Without another word, she threw the contract onto his desk and walked out, leaving behind the man who had just proven that he was exactly who she had feared he was all along. Alexander had always prided himself on being in control. Control over his company, his reputation, and his emotions. But as he stood in his dimly lit office, staring at the contract Emily had thrown on his desk, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years: panic. He had made countless business deals, negotiated with the most cutthroat executives, and crushed competitors without a second thought. Yet none of it had ever shaken him like this. Like losing her. He had known she would be angry when she found out. But he had convinced himself that he would have time to explain, to make her understand, that she would see it was never about getting rid of her, that it was never about her at all. But she hadn't given him that chance. She had walked out, and this time, she wasn't coming back. His phone buzzed. Damien. He ignored the call. He wasn't in the mood for his best friend's judgment. Instead, he grabbed his keys and stormed out of his office, his mind set on one thing: finding her. The city streets were a blur of lights and honking cars as he drove. Emily wasn't answering her phone, and the more time that passed, the more his chest tightened with something dangerously close to fear. He had never feared anything before, but losing her, that terrified him. By the time he reached her apartment, his pulse was a violent drumbeat in his ears. He pounded on her door, his usual composure completely shattered. "Emily." No answer. Another knock, harder this time. "Emily, open the door." Silence. Then, just when he was about to break the damn thing down, the lock clicked, and the door swung open. Emily stood there, her eyes red-rimmed, her expression exhausted but fierce. And for the first time in his life, Alexander Graves, the billionaire CEO, felt completely powerless. "What are you doing here?" Her voice was sharp, but he could hear the pain beneath it. "You made your decision, Alexander. What else is there to say?" He stepped forward, but she immediately crossed her arms, blocking him out. "It wasn't what you think," he started, his voice rough. "I wasn't trying to get rid of you." "Then what were you doing?" she demanded, her voice rising. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks a hell of a lot like you were planning to erase me from your life." He ran a frustrated hand through his hair, something only he did when he was on the verge of losing control. "I was trying to protect you." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Protect me?" She shook her head in disbelief. "By firing me? By making me look like I was nothing more than a mistake?" He exhaled sharply, his fists clenching at his sides. "You don't understand, Emily. If I hadn't signed that contract, they would have destroyed you. The board, the investors, Veronica, they all saw you as a liability. They wanted you gone." Her breath hitched, but she kept her chin high. So you just gave them what they wanted? No, he snapped. I made sure you left with everything. I fought for your severance, for job offers at top companies. I made sure you would be untouchable. She stared at him, her expression unreadable. And you didn't think to tell me any of this? I thought I had time, he admitted, his voice hoarse. I thought I could fix it before you found out. She shook her head, stepping back. You don't get it, do you? Her voice wavered, but the fire in her eyes didn't. It wasn't about the job, Alexander. It was about you. I trusted you. I believed in you. And you didn't even give me the chance to fight for myself. His throat tightened. He had never been good with words, never been the kind of man to spill emotions. But right now, none of that mattered. He had to fix this. He had to fix them. Emily, please, he murmured, his voice quieter now, raw with something he wasn't used to admitting. Desperation. I can't lose you. Her lips parted slightly, as if his words had caught her off guard. But then she hardened again. You already did. And with that, she closed the door. And for the first time in his life, Alexander Graves had lost a battle. And it was the only one that had ever mattered. Alexander Graves had always believed that emotions were a weakness, a distraction that only led to poor decisions. He had built his empire on logic, on control, on ruthless efficiency. But as he sat in his penthouse, drowning in the silence of his own making, he realized that all the power, all the money, all the influence in the world meant nothing if he had lost her. The city skyline stretched endlessly before him, lights flickering like stars against the darkness. But he didn't see any of it. His mind was replaying the moment she had shut the door in his face, the finality in her voice when she said he had already lost her. She was gone. And for the first time in his life, he felt truly alone. His phone lay on the glass table in front of him, untouched, except for the dozens of unanswered messages from Damien. He ignored them all. What was there to say? That he had finally met his match and let her slip through his fingers? That the one person who had made him feel alive had walked away, and he had no one to blame but himself? He ran a hand over his face, frustration clawing at his chest. He had tried to do the right thing. He had tried to protect her, but in doing so, he had done the one thing she could never forgive. He had taken away her choice. And now, he was paying the price. His fists clenched as the memories of the past few months flooded his mind. The way she had challenged him, pushed him, and seen him when no one else had. How her laughter had softened the sharp edges of his world. How her presence had become the one thing he looked forward to every damn day. And now she was gone. A harsh breath escaped him as he stood abruptly, pacing across the room. He had faced corporate takeovers, lawsuits, and betrayals from business partners. None of them had ever shaken him. But Emily did. She had walked into his life with her fire, her defiance, and her unwavering belief in people, and turned everything he knew upside down. And now that she was gone, nothing made sense anymore. He grabbed his keys. He wasn't going to sit here drowning in regret. He had spent too much of his life running from emotions, from vulnerability, from love. But if losing her had taught him anything, it was that some things were worth risking everything for. And he was done being a coward. The rain poured down in sheets as he drove through the city, his grip tight on the wheel, his heart pounding with a desperation he had never known. He didn't care that it was the middle of the night. He didn't care that he had no plan. All he knew was that he had to see her, had to tell her the truth. By the time he reached her apartment, he was soaked to the bone. But he didn't care. He pounded on her door, his pulse hammering in his ears. "Emily!" he called, his voice rough, urgent. No answer. He knocked again, harder this time. "Emily, please. Just open the door." Silence. A moment passed. Then, slowly, the door creaked open, and there she was, standing in the dim light of her apartment, wrapped in an oversized sweater, her hair slightly messy, her expression guarded. But she had been crying. His chest tightened at the sight. "Alexander," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He exhaled sharply, his shoulders dropping, as if seeing her had stolen all the fight from him. "I can't do this," she said, shaking her head. "I can't keep playing these games." "Neither can I," he admitted, his voice raw. He took a step closer, but she didn't move. "That's why I'm here." She swallowed hard, her gaze flickering with hesitation. "Why now?" He let out a bitter laugh, running a hand through his wet hair. "Because I'm an idiot. Because I let fear dictate my decisions. Because I thought pushing you away would protect you when all it did was destroy the one thing that mattered to me." Her breath hitched, but she didn't say anything. He took another step, his voice softer now. "I made a mistake, Emily. The biggest damn mistake of my life. And I don't expect you to forgive me. But I need you to know. He hesitated, the words catching in his throat. He had never said them before, never even thought he was capable of them. But right now, in this moment, nothing had ever felt more true. "I love you." The words hung between them, fragile yet heavy, raw yet undeniable. And for the first time in his life, Alexander Graves, the billionaire who had built walls around his heart, let himself be completely, utterly vulnerable. Alexander stood there, the rainwater dripping from his hair, his breath uneven, his pulse hammering like a war drum in his chest. He had said the words, the 3 words he had spent his entire life avoiding, the ones he had never thought he would be capable of saying. "I love you." But Emily didn't move, didn't speak. She didn't throw herself into his arms like he had foolishly imagined. Instead, she stared at him with wide, disbelieving eyes, as if trying to decipher whether this was another one of his calculated moves. Another strategy. Another negotiation. And that realization gutted him. "Say something," he murmured, his voice rough, desperate. Emily's lips parted, but no words came. Instead, she took a slow, measured breath, as if bracing herself. "You don't get to do this, Alexander." Her voice was quiet, but it cut through him sharper than any corporate takedown ever had. "You don't get to stand here, say those words, and expect me to forget everything." His jaw clenched, but he forced himself to hold her gaze. "I don't expect you to forget," he said, his voice low. "I don't expect anything, Emily. But I need you to know that it was never a game to me. That you were never just a passing distraction." She let out a hollow laugh, shaking her head. "Really? Because it sure felt like it." She stepped back, wrapping her arms around herself, as if trying to create distance, to shield herself. "You made decisions about my life, about us, without even talking to me. You didn't trust me enough to let me in. And now—" Her voice cracked for a second, and she quickly looked away, blinking back tears. "Now, you just expect me to believe that you suddenly care?" "I have always cared," he ground out, frustration bleeding into his voice. "That's the problem, Emily. I cared so much that I let it control me. I let my fear of losing you push me into doing the one thing that made it happen." He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his damp hair, struggling to find the right words. Words had always been his weapon, his shield. But now, they felt utterly useless. "I have built my entire life around control. Around making calculated decisions. Around never letting anyone have the power to hurt me." His throat tightened, but he forced himself to keep going. "And then you came along, and you ruined everything." Emily flinched slightly, and he immediately took a step forward, his voice softer now. "You ruined every rule I had set for myself. You made me care. Made me feel things I didn't even think were possible. And it terrified me. It still terrifies me." He let out a bitter breath, his hands curling into fists. But losing you? That scares me more. Emily stared at him, her expression unreadable, but he could see the storm of emotions flickering in her eyes. Then prove it. Her words were barely above a whisper, but they slammed into him like a force of nature. He swallowed hard. Tell me what you want, he said, his voice steady. Whatever it is, it's yours. Emily inhaled deeply, as if gathering the last of her resolve. Then she lifted her chin, meeting his gaze with unwavering determination. Walk away. His entire body tensed, every instinct screaming at him that he had misheard her. What? If you love me, she said, her voice firmer now, then let me go. No chasing, no grand gestures, no trying to control the outcome. Just let me go. The words felt like a physical blow. Every part of him rejected the idea, the thought of walking away from her, of letting her slip through his fingers for good. But wasn't that what love was? Not possession, not controlled, but choice. His throat worked, his heart hammering so hard it hurt. And then finally, after what felt like an eternity, he gave a small nod. Okay. Emily's breath hitched slightly, as if she hadn't expected him to agree. As if she had braced herself for another fight. But he wasn't going to fight her. Not anymore. He reached into his pocket, pulling out the key to her apartment. The one she had given him without even thinking about it months ago, back when they had trusted each other without question. He held it out to her. This belongs to you. She hesitated before taking it, her fingers brushing against his for the briefest second. It felt like a goodbye. Maybe it was. He took a slow step back, his gaze lingering on her face, memorizing every detail. And then, without another word, he turned and walked away, leaving behind the only thing that had ever truly mattered. Alexander had never known silence could be so loud. Every step away from Emily felt like a battle against every instinct screaming at him to turn back, to fight for her, to demand that she stay. But he had given her a choice, and he had walked away just as she asked. It was supposed to be the right thing, the selfless thing. But the moment the door shut behind him, sealing her away from him, it felt like the world had collapsed beneath his feet. He forced himself to move, to keep walking, to not look back, but every fiber of his being rebelled against it. His chest was tight, his fists clenched, his breath uneven. He had fought against corporate giants, survived betrayals, and manipulated billion-dollar deals without breaking a sweat. And yet, he had never felt this helpless in his entire life. His driver was already waiting by the curb, the black car blending into the night, but Alexander didn't get in. Instead, he stood in the rain, letting it soak through his already drenched clothes as he stared at the city lights flickering in the distance. He should have felt relief. He had done what she wanted. He had proved that he loved her enough to let her go. So why did it feel like he had just made the biggest mistake of his life? The days that followed were torture. His penthouse felt empty, his office suffocating. Every meeting was an exercise in restraint as he forced himself to go through the motions. He had spent years building a life of power, of control, of untouchable success, and yet none of it mattered anymore. He checked his phone too often, hoping, praying for a message from her. But it never came. Emily had meant every word. She was done. And for the first time in his life, he realized that all the power in the world couldn't fix this. It wasn't about strategies, about winning or losing. This wasn't a deal he could negotiate, a problem he could throw money at. This was love. And love required something he had never learned how to do: fight for someone without trying to control them. Days turned into weeks, and the weight of her absence became unbearable. He tried to drown himself in work, in distractions, in meaningless interactions, but nothing worked. Every empty conversation, every forced smile at corporate events, every night spent alone in his penthouse, only reinforced the truth he had been avoiding. He didn't just want her. He needed her. Not as an accessory to his life, not as a temporary escape from his loneliness, but as his equal, as his partner, as the one person who made his world make sense. And if he had to fight for her, then he would. But this time, he would do it right. The decision hit him like lightning, electrifying his entire being. He wasn't going to manipulate the situation, wasn't going to use power plays or force her into anything. He was going to show her that he had changed, that he was willing to do the one thing he had spent his life avoiding, being vulnerable, being real, being hers. With renewed determination, he set his plan into motion. He started small, reaching out to the people she cared about, supporting the causes she had been passionate about, not as a billionaire flexing his wealth, but as a man who genuinely believed in what she stood for. He donated anonymously to the charity she had worked for, attended events he would have once ignored, and listened instead of dictating. He became the kind of man she would be proud of, not because it would win her back, but because it was who he should have been all along. And then, when the time was right, he sent her a single message. Meet me. One last time. No expectations. Just us. He didn't know if she would come. But when he arrived at the small cafe, the one where she had once dragged him, claiming it had the best coffee in the city despite his preference for high-end exclusivity, she was already there, sitting by the window, her fingers curled around a cup, her expression unreadable. His heart pounded as he approached, every ounce of his carefully constructed confidence stripped away in her presence. "Emily," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. She looked up, her gaze searching his. "Why are you here, Alexander?" He took a slow breath. "Because I love you, and this time I'm not here to prove it with grand gestures or empty words. I'm here because I finally understand what love means." She didn't speak, but she didn't walk away either. He took that as his only chance. "I spent my life believing that love was a weakness, that vulnerability was something to be avoided at all costs. But I was wrong." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to something raw, something real. "Loving you doesn't make me weak. It makes me stronger. But I had to lose you to realize that." She swallowed, her fingers tightening around the cup. "And what do you expect me to do with that, Alexander?" "Nothing," he admitted. "I don't expect anything. This isn't about me winning. It's about you knowing that I see you, that I respect your choices, that I love you enough to let you go if that's what you still want." Her eyes softened, her defenses cracking just slightly. "And if I don't want that?" His breath hitched, hope flaring in his chest. "Then I'll spend the rest of my life proving that I'm worthy of you." A moment of silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words, with emotions too big to name. And then, slowly, she reached across the table, her fingers brushing against his. A silent answer. A second chance. And this time, he wouldn't waste it. The world had always seen Alexander Drake as an untouchable force. A man of steel, a billionaire whose empire stretched across industries, a name that commanded both fear and respect. But tonight, as he held Emily's hand beneath the soft glow of the stars, he was just a man who had fought battles not in boardrooms, but within his own heart. A man who had nearly lost the only thing that ever truly mattered. But love had won. Emily glanced up at him, her fingers tightening around his. "So, what now?" There was no fear in her voice this time, no hesitation, only warmth, only hope. He exhaled, a slow, deep breath that felt like shedding a lifetime of burdens. "Now," he said, "we live. Not in a gilded cage of power, not under the crushing weight of expectations, but as two people who had defied everything, status, pride, fear, for love." Their story had been filled with storms, with betrayals, with pain. But it had also been filled with moments like this, moments of quiet, of understanding, of real love. Because love wasn't about perfection. It wasn't about grand gestures or fairy tales. It was about choosing each other, again and again, no matter how many times they stumbled. In the distance, the city shimmered, a world that had once been his entire universe. But now, standing here with Emily, he knew the truth. Money could buy the world, but it could never buy what he had found in her. She smiled up at him, and in that smile, he saw their future. Not one built on transactions or obligations, but one built on trust, on love that had been earned, not just given. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a slow, reverent kiss against her fingers. "Are you ready for forever?" Her eyes softened, shining with the kind of love that no wealth could ever match. "I was always ready, Alexander. I was just waiting for you to catch up." He laughed, a deep, rich sound that was rare but completely unguarded. And as he pulled her into his arms, holding her like he never planned to let go, he knew this was their perfect ending. But really, it was just the beginning. Love this story? Want more heart-racing billionaire romances? Subscribe to The Wealthy Heart now and never miss a story that will leave you breathless. Hit that like button, drop a comment, and tell us, would you take a chance on love like this? Alexander had always believed that power could move mountains, that wealth could command loyalty, that influence could rewrite fate. But standing there, in front of the woman who had unknowingly unraveled every carefully constructed piece of his existence, he realized something earth-shattering. Love required neither power nor wealth. It required surrender. And he was ready. Ready to give up the control he had clung to his entire life. Ready to let himself feel in a way he had never allowed before. Emily stood before him, uncertain, hesitant, her eyes searching his as if she was waiting for him to prove her fears right. Waiting for him to use manipulation, to bend reality to his will, to make this about winning rather than about love. But this time, he wouldn't. This time, he was going to lay his heart bare, not as the billionaire CEO who could have anything, but as a man who had lost everything that truly mattered. "Come with me," he said, his voice steady but laced with something deeper, something real. She hesitated. "Alexander, Just trust me," he said softly, holding out his hand, his fingers open, vulnerable, waiting. For the first time, she didn't pull away. She let him lead her, even as wariness flickered in her expression. He took her to the one place he had never let anyone in before. His private estate outside the city, the one he had built years ago but had never truly lived in. The massive mansion had always been an architectural masterpiece, designed to impress, to intimidate. But tonight, it was transformed. Because tonight, it wasn't about luxury. It was about love. Thousands of tiny lights twinkled across the sprawling gardens, a soft glow casting a warmth that had never existed in his world before. A pathway of candles led through the vast estate, weaving through memories he had never shared with anyone. His childhood treehouse, his mother's favorite bench by the lake, the small greenhouse he had built but never used. And at the center of it all, in the very heart of the estate, was something that stole Emily's breath away. A small, beautiful cottage. A home. Not a mansion, not a fortress of solitude, but a place built with warmth, with intention. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the soft rustling of the trees. He swallowed hard, forcing himself to say the words he had never spoken to anyone before. "This is what I never had growing up. A place that felt like more than just walls and ceilings. A place that felt like home." Her lips parted, her breath catching as she turned to look at him, truly look at him. And for the first time, he let her see everything. The boy who had grown up in a house filled with coldness and expectations. The man who had built an empire to shield himself from pain. The billionaire who had spent his life searching for something he hadn't even known he was missing. Until her. "I had everything," he admitted, his voice raw. "But I never had this. Never had someone who made a place feel like home. Until you." She blinked rapidly, emotions crashing over her, her walls crumbling under the weight of his truth. "I don't need a grand gesture, Alexander. I know, he said softly. But I do. I need you to know that this isn't about proving something or winning you back with extravagant displays. This is about showing you that I understand now. That love isn't about power or control. It's about choosing someone, over and over again, every single day. And I choose you. Silence stretched between them, thick with emotion, with years of longing and heartbreak converging into this single moment. And then, she took a trembling step forward, her fingers reaching for his, intertwining, grounding. You finally get it, she whispered. His throat tightened, his grip on her hand firm, unwavering. I finally do. And in that moment, under the warm glow of the lights, with nothing but their hearts laid bare between them, Alexander realized something. This wasn't a grand gesture. This was love. Alexander had spent his life chasing deals, conquering markets, and bending the world to his will. But now, standing in the quiet warmth of the home he had built for her, he realized none of it had ever mattered. Not the billions, not the power, not the prestige. Only this moment. Only her. Emily stood before him, her eyes filled with emotions too deep, too raw to be named. He had never seen her like this before. Unguarded, vulnerable, beautiful in a way that stole the air from his lungs. For so long, he had been afraid of this moment, terrified of giving someone the power to break him. But love wasn't about control. It wasn't about winning or losing. It was about trust. And for the first time in his life, he was ready to trust. The silence stretched between them, thick with the weight of everything they had been through. And then, she moved. Just one step. A hesitant, uncertain step toward him. And then another. And another. And before he could even breathe, she was in his arms. His hands found her waist, her warmth sinking into him, grounding him in a way nothing else ever had. Her arms wrapped around his neck, clinging to him as if she were afraid he would disappear. But he wouldn't. Not now. Not ever. I tried to forget you, she whispered, her voice breaking. I tried to move on. He closed his eyes, his forehead resting against hers. Did it work? She let out a soft, broken laugh. It never did. Relief crashed over him like a tidal wave, but he didn't let it consume him. This wasn't about relief. This was about redemption. I love you, Emily. The words were so simple, so small compared to everything he felt, but they carried the weight of a lifetime. I love you in a way that terrifies me, in a way that makes me want to be a better man, and I will spend the rest of my life proving that to you. She pulled back just enough to look into his eyes, searching for any trace of doubt, any sign that he was saying this just to win her back. But there was none, because for the first time, Alexander Drake was telling the absolute truth. A slow, trembling smile spread across her lips, and he knew that this was it. This was them. No more running, no more fear, no more walls between them. Just love. Just them. And as her lips met his, soft and warm and home, Alexander knew one thing with absolute certainty. He had finally won the only thing that had ever truly mattered. Her heart. The world had always seen Alexander Drake as an untouchable force, a man of steel, a billionaire whose empire stretched across industries, a name that commanded both fear and respect. But tonight, as he held Emily's hand beneath the soft glow of the stars, he was just a man who had fought battles not in boardrooms, but within his own heart, a man who had nearly lost the only thing that ever truly mattered. But love had won. Emily glanced up at him, her fingers tightening around his. So, what now? There was no fear in her voice this time, no hesitation, only warmth, only hope. He exhaled, a slow, deep breath that felt like shedding a lifetime of burdens. Now, he said, we live. Not in a gilded cage of power, not under the crushing weight of expectations, but as two people who had defied everything, status, pride, fear, for love. Their story had been filled with storms, with betrayals, with pain. But it had also been filled with moments like this, moments of quiet, of understanding, of real love. Because love wasn't about perfection. It wasn't about grand gestures or fairy tales. It was about choosing each other, again and again, no matter how many times they stumbled. In the distance, the city shimmered, a world that had once been his entire universe. But now, standing here with Emily, he knew the truth. Money could buy the world, but it could never buy what he had found in her. She smiled up at him, and in that smile, he saw their future. Not one built on transactions or obligations, but one built on trust, on love that had been earned, not just given. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a slow, reverent kiss against her fingers. "Are you ready for forever?" Her eyes softened, shining with the kind of love that no wealth could ever match. "I was always ready, Alexander. I was just waiting for you to catch up." He laughed, a deep, rich sound that was rare but completely unguarded. And as he pulled her into his arms, holding her like he never planned to let go, he knew this was their perfect ending. But really, it was just the beginning. Love this story? Want more heart-racing billionaire romances? Subscribe to The Wealthy Heart now and never miss a story that will leave you breathless. Hit that like button, drop a comment, and tell us. Would you take a chance on love like this?